Hi everyone and welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. Today I have with me Jake Jacobs. Now I don't know why he shortened Jacobs to Jake, but maybe he could only spell four-letter words at the time. He was quite young, I really don't know. But great to have you on the show, Jake. And Jake is an organisational psychology student. And he's been studying change and the psychology of change for almost his entire life. He's written a book called Leverage Change, 8 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results, which is out now, I believe, on Amazon. And is a great read. And we're going to dive into change, which with what's happened in the world in the last year, we've had accelerated change. A lot of people are trying to work out, do we do hybrid business? Do we do a remote business? Do we invite everyone back? Do we just pack up and go home? I really don't know. But we're going to have a chat about all those sorts of things. So Jake's facilitated major change efforts with the City of New York, the US National Forest Service and Environmental Protection Agency, and the United Kingdom's National Health and Employment Services. So obviously you escaped the USA for a short period or something, is that correct?
A little bit in the Commonwealth, yes.
Okay, well, welcome to the Commonwealth, because that's my ecosystem as well. Except in the English sent the Australians out as convicts originally, but we're still working on that. And Jake says organisational change doesn't have to be difficult. And in his book, Leverage Change, he shares 8 fail-safe ways to make any change initiative easier, faster, and more effective. And who doesn't like faster and more effective? So welcome to the show, Jake. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. And we're going to cover we're going to cover a few different topics, because we had a little bit of preamble before we hit the record. And this is going to be a great conversation, I know. And we've already talked about religion and marriage and online dating, just a few topics, which I don't know if we'll actually get to, but that's okay. But we're going to get into change. So Jake, you went and did a university degree in organisational psychology. Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay, and then you got a job, well, either during that time, and it involved alcohol. Is that correct?
That is also true. I feel like I'm on a witness stand and I'm being led, but yes, it involved actually a lot of alcohol, Jeff.
Okay, right.
Be clear.
So what was your first change project and how did that start?
Right. So at university, I wanted to earn a little bit extra money, and I had already found a home on campus. It was not the psychology building, but it was a place called Dooley's of Ann Arbor. And Dooley's was a bar that served a lot of that alcohol.
Right.
In fact, Thursday night was beat the clock. So just to date myself a little bit, it was 50 cents a mixed drink on the hour at 8. And then it was 15 cents more a drink on the hour up till midnight. So this is like $3 for a pitcher of mixed drinks. So this was a good place to hang out when you were in college. And it was even a better place to get a job. So I started working there as a bouncer and quickly moved my way up the hierarchy. And that meant that you got to be a bartender. So I was tending bar, and the first project that came along really was me listening to a bunch of my coworkers complain, whine about, and sometimes me, about the hours, the job, what we had to do, the manager, what kind of guy he was. And I was in the organizational psychology department, and I said, wait a second, maybe I can do an independent study and I can get credit for this. And I can also try and make it a decent place to work. So at that point, I contracted with the owner of the bar to be able to do a consulting project. And he said, that's fine, Jacobs, just don't F anything up, which was my first contract with a client. I don't know if the bar was low or high, but we went ahead. I actually interviewed people. We did some questionnaires, We had some meetings, and things got better. They actually got better, and people told me that it was worthwhile. And so at that point, I realized, I said, well, this is something that I can do well. It matters. I enjoy it. Maybe there's a way that I could make a living at this. And that was the beginning of my consulting career.
Nothing like a good drink to start a consulting career, is it?
Or the beat the clock hour.
So you then moved on after a successful first gig, and
Yeah.
did you get credits for that against your degree?
High marks. In fact, I'll tell you just one quick story, Jeff, is that there's a kind of research called participant observation,
Right.
which means that you like show up and you watch things that are happening to better understand them. And so I thought, look, I could show up at the bars and I could watch. And one of the things I had was adherence to culture. And I said, there's supposed to be 2 inches of foam on the beer on a pitcher. And so I said, look, if people get 2 inches of foam on the beer, that's actually adhering to the culture. That's like following the
Yeah.
rules of what you're supposed to do. And it more or less, you're not. So I had like a definition I was using for culture. So I went to the psychology department and I said, look, if I sit in the bar and I just watch these people pull these pitchers of beer, it's going to look weird. Like, what's this guy doing here? And I didn't want to spend my own money. So I appealed to the board in the psychology department for a stipend so that they would buy my beer and I would be able to sit there and drink and watch other people pull the pitchers and measure their culture. Needless to say, they kicked my butt out of that meeting quicker than I could ask a second time. But I thought it was a good, reasonable argument. It just didn't win that day.
Well, it's good to know that you learn by watching as well as doing. I think that's very important because you've got to do things to learn. In fact, as we both know, that doing your university or college degree is just where it starts. It's just a ticket of entry to get in the front door of a corporation quite often. And then that's when you really start learning, is when you start doing grading. So you moved on to did an internship after that, which was during your degree. Is that correct?
It was after I had graduated. I actually been quite blessed. I had great mentors, and I got involved in doing work that, in one sense, I probably didn't even have a right to do. So I was 23 years old, and we were working at Ford on a global change effort around culture change to more participative management. And I was running these large group meetings of 200, 300, 400 people, interactive roll up the sleeves working sessions. This was cutting edge work in my field. And I was 23 years old, and I didn't know any better. I didn't know that it was almost inappropriate for me to be leading 50-year-old men. And most of them were 50-year-old men in the mid 80s at Ford. But that lesson about what's possible with those mentors, I got from that very first internship.
Right. So how long were you at Ford for?
Well, we worked there as a consulting company for about 6 or 7 years, and literally did work around the world. And what I think's interesting about it is that it led to another project that was even larger than the work at Ford. And we worked at Marriott, Hotel Resorts and Suites, and we worked on a project there for 5 years around quality. And the properties that were there were all about what their vision was for quality. And we worked in very large groups teaching them their 7 basic tools of quality, and people learning these. I still remember the Haitian housekeepers at the LAX, the Los Angeles Airport Marriott, were there doing their fishbone diagrams and actually working through very complex tools that help better serve the customer, because they all knew that they cared about better serving the customer. And I think even today, in all the work that I've done, that same nature of what can we do to provide better services is at the core of what makes for successful organizations.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we've got a hospitality company here in Australia, run by Justin Hems, and his organisation, and you can see it whenever he goes and buys a pub, turns it into a gourmet pub, or goes and buys a location or an old hotel, reinvigorates it, and you can see that the staff are well trained, and it makes such a difference. And it's both culture as well as the way they do it, as opposed to walking to some places, you walk in and you're going, where's hospitality 101 here? And you can see people are just being thrown in without any training versus those that have been shown a culture. And it's very interesting about what you mentioned about Marriott in that. And it's especially important with customer facing, isn't it, in hospitality?
Absolutely. And this is just a quick aside because I am one of those guys. I think I got into this field partially because I pay attention to the minutia as a customer about how I'm treated.
Yep.
And I notice it, and bad design and bad process drives me crazy. Like when somebody's not doing their job well. And a number of dates of mine have gone south because I was not satisfied with the service and how I
well, we won't get into the service side of that. So
yeah, we're going to leave that on the table. But recently, I was on vacation, and it was a fine Italian restaurant. And I will just say briefly that we got a charcuterie board. So they had the cheese and the meat and all of this, and then they had some crostini, and there wasn't enough crostini for the cheese or the meat. I don't eat a lot of crostini, but even for me, there wasn't enough. And I asked the waiter 3 times for more crostini. I asked the busboy once for more crostini. They couldn't give it to, I don't know where the crostini was, but it wasn't on my table. And I actually had to go get the manager of the restaurant to get my damn crostini. And, everybody was nervous. The people at the front hostess counter, like the guy at table 37's out of control, sort of, is probably what they were saying to each other. And I went ahead and I finally got my crostini, and then it was time for the tip. Right. So I'm a pay for performance guy. So I'm like, I've never walked out of a restaurant with 0 tip in my life. And I emphatically left everything off this guy's tip because I thought, you can't get me crostini, I can't get you a tip. You can put that on a bumper sticker.
Okay, that's awesome. So on the tipping side, if you come to Australia, we do tip, but in Australia, we pay our waiting staff much better than generally is done in a country I've heard of in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And whereas when I go to America, it's like, God, I'm actually responsible for paying the waiting staff because otherwise they don't get any money. Whereas in Australia, the person that runs a business actually pays their employees, which
decent wage.
Yeah, so it's a very different culture thing, and as an Australian going to America, it's almost, oh God, was it 10%? Is it 15? And is it 35? And now it's starting to be automated. It's like you can choose A, B, C, or D.
Yeah, right.
And whereas you come to Australia, if you don't tip, it's not a biggie because guess what? They're already getting paid quite well. So it's a very different culture. So, but if I do tip quite regularly in Australia, because I'm going, you know what, that service was pretty good and the food was, fantastic. So, I don't know if it makes any difference when I go back. I don't think it does. But at any rate, and I love the fact that you're aware. I think that's very important. And I think that's where change starts to happen is by being aware, sitting back and watching. And you mentioned about dates, and I've done a few dates over the past few decades, and sometimes part of that is you'll meet someone and they will talk for half an hour and don't draw a breath, and you're going, wow, that listening is not very good. So, yeah, you just got to be...
the dinner table for 30 years. Is this how I want to spend my life? Is that the question?
That's right. Yeah, being ear bashed. How good's your listening skills? Because that's going to be very important in a relationship.
Exactly. Do you have any? Can we tell if you have any?
Yeah, so let me pull my notebook out right now, and I'll give you some feedback. In fact, I'm going to bring out my 8 levers of change that are going to help you get the right man, and it's not me.
Exactly. I actually just carry it around with me and bring it out at the table for, consults at times.
So let's leap into. I'm going to leap back a little bit into you went and did your degree at a Jesuit college.
I did.
And I love the story you shared. I think we need to share it with that, and it's a bit of reflection. So we are going to touch a little bit on religion, but in a kind way, because you're not supposed to talk about religion or politics at a dinner table. But if you do, it sometimes gets really fun, just to see some
Right.
people light
Right.
up. Yeah,
And we're not even eating. This is a podcast, so
yeah.
I'm fine by that.
So you went to a Jesuit college, but you weren't allowed to be on campus. Why
No.
was that? Why was that?
Well, this was an organization development master's program, so it's still in my field. And it was a funky program. I mean, funky, we would travel every couple months to somewhere else where we would spend a week. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with something called a T group. That is, in my field, it's sort of where group dynamics and studying teams and stuff started. But what happens in a T group is you have no agenda. So you get 10 people sitting around
Hmm.
with no agenda other than to learn about their own behavior.
Right.
So everybody becomes somebody else's mother or father, and they start like working these issues out, with somebody that has nothing to do with their mother or father. And this is all going on. We spent a week in a T group working on personal growth and development with no agenda. So when I say it's a funky program, and people were getting carried away, there was one woman, just to give you an idea, there was one woman when we were choosing which groups to go into. She had told me the prior week she could never be in my group because I was too intense.
Right.
So I was like, okay, her choice. Well, it turns out that we're in groups of 7, 7, and 8, which is the way we have to have these groups numbered. And we're done. We spent a whole day choosing these groups. And I look next to me, and who's there? This woman, Celia, who says, I'm too intense.
Hmm.
And I do I blow this whole thing up and make everybody start choosing groups again? Or do I spend 2 years with Celia, who's too intense and has already told me she doesn't want to be in my group? So what do you think I did?
I have no idea.
Kaboom. I'm like, I'm not going to be in a group with Celia. I don't mind her, but she didn't want to be in my group. So off I go, which now has us at 886. And now whole thing had to get restructured. But this is the kind of program it was. So you spend an entire day choosing which of these groups you're going to be working in for 2 years. And then you end up with somebody next to you who doesn't even want to be there, and you blow it up. So when I say it was a funky program, like we weren't sitting in rows of seats taking notes. There were a bunch of really different things. We traveled to Banff. We traveled to Pajaro Dunes in Northern California. So all of this is by way of saying that the Jesuits didn't look kindly on our program. There was a lot of drinking. There were some Monty Python scenes that were replayed as part of the entertainment. So this whole Jesuit program was the best program in organization development at the time that I went to it. And we were not allowed on campus until graduation.
Hmm.
And then they actually had a monitor with our class to watch over us as we were getting our cap and gown.
Because and you used the phrase you weren't allowed on campus because you weren't Jesuit enough.
Yeah, we weren't we weren't Jesuit enough. And honestly, if I'm coming clean, I don't think we were Jesuit at all. I don't know what that means, but we were far afield of what they expected. And everybody did look a bit different when we got to graduation, come to think of it.
Yeah. Look, I totally get that because it sounds like that they were afraid of an outside evil influence, Jacobs, um, leading them to a terrible place. Um, and look, I grew up in a church too that didn't agree with dancing, coffee, alcohol either. And I'm going to say this joke because it's actually quite a good one, and I told it to you. I think it's worth reflecting on, and our audience, I think, has maybe grown up enough to appreciate it. And the joke is because Adventists weren't allowed to go to dances, right? So, because the problem is that you shouldn't have sex before marriage because dancing might break out. So, uh,
Sure.
yeah, you've got to be very careful. And I'm sorry to hear that you weren't Jesuit enough, but it's part of life. And obviously, some religions maybe need to do some change management. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, we all could use a little change management. And
Well,
that's from a consultant who does this for a living. So I'm just, looking for clients.
I'm a specialist in change. I'm up to about my seventh or eighth career. A friend of mine called me the most reinvented man he's ever met. Um, I could have used the word evolved, but that's maybe pushing it a little bit far out, pushing the boat a little bit far out. But I remember going to and you mentioned about awareness and other things by watching and listening. I remember one of the best courses I ever did was a 6 month, quite intense, with workshops and weekends away. And it was a book on the only way you could really be a good communicator. It was actually a 6 month counselling course, and I did the first 6 months of it. And one of the first things about it was you met in small groups and people reflected on how they thought about you. And I remember you said that this woman thought you were too intense. And and maybe, Jake, that was a learning opportunity. You just don't know. But the reality was when I went to these classes, I was told how I came across, and I went, gee, I didn't know that. And then so this course and workshops helped me create a lot more self-awareness, because when you're self-aware, then you can be more aware of others, because that leads to much better communication. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that sort of thing. Like, you obviously do a lot of people watching.
Yes. As I stare into your eyes. And the question.
And the question is, how important is awareness in change management?
Well, I think that there's awareness of self
Hmm.
and there's awareness of other.
Yep.
So I need, as a good leader, I really need to be in touch with, who I am and who I want to be.
Hmm.
So one of the projects I was on recently, and I was a member of a committee, and usually, you get on a committee by not being at the previous meeting, or you get on a committee because you are the kind of person who gets on them. That was my reason. But there was a woman who was leading it called Julie, and Julie did a great job. So I actually made a video. People can go on LinkedIn and see this. I made a video about Julie because I said, look, here's who I see. She's caring, she's diligent, she's disciplined, she's great follow through, a lot of awareness of herself, all these adjectives. And I said, you can go and do this yourself, and your listeners can do this. Write up a list of adjectives that they would like to be described by. And then
Right.
go to the people that report to them and ask them to type up the adjectives they would use to describe them.
Hmm.
You type it because there's anonymity,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
You don't know who's saying what. So then get somebody to collect these, and they don't have to read them either, but just then collect them yourself and look at the two lists and say, how close is my aspiration of who I want to be to people's real experience of who I am?
Right.
And so that notion is like a gauge of how close am I to paying attention to myself and knowing that the impact that I'm having. And this T group that I was telling you about was also all about what impact am I having on other people? Am I showing up in the world the way I think I am and the way I want to be? So that's an awareness of self, and the awareness of other. Yeah, there's listening, right? One of the things, and this was another one of these LinkedIn videos that I did. They're 2-minute Jake on change videos. So Jake Jacobs on LinkedIn, you can go get a whole series of these. But when I was in high school, I had a favorite band, REO Speedwagon. I don't know if they were
Yeah, I've
big
heard
in
it. Yep. Yep.
Australia or not. So I'm actually gonna, I will do this only for you, Jeff. This isn't everybody's podcast that gets this, but REO Speedwagon had a song 157 Riverside Avenue, and Gary Richrath was the guitar player and Kevin Cronin was the singer. I know this because they were my favorite band. So in 157 Riverside Avenue, there's a brief period where Kevin Cronin, the singer, says, you know, in order to speak to guitar, you have to speak to them in their own language.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, see, watch. And so he starts singing, do, 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 do. And then Gary Richrath pulls out the guitar and starts hitting those same chords in response.
Okay.
So they go back and forth with this riff on 157 Riverside Avenue. In the LinkedIn video, I said, look, people focus on communication and they talk about listening. But I think there's a whole nother level of communication, which is, can you speak to people in their own language?
Mm.
Can I talk to you in a way that makes sense to you, as opposed to getting caught up in my own paradigm, my own lingo, my own language, and I'm talking to you from me? No, let me come into your world and really be aware of the other, you in this case, and be able to, as Kevin Cronin told Gary Richrath so many years ago, the only way to speak to them is to speak to them in their own language. And when people can understand what you're saying, I think that's more than halfway of getting to this magic moment of communication where there's meaning that gets shared between people. And it doesn't matter how big the organization is. I've worked in, you know, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. There's 1 million people who work there.
Wow.
So very large organizations or very small conversations between two people, it's the same thing. If I can start to appreciate you in a way that I can speak to you in your own language, I think that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And I, over the last 10, 12 years, I've done a fair bit of writing, and I realised that I needed to keep writing simple so that I could get the message across without getting people lost in acronyms. And I have a word, and I have a little bit of a saying, which if you see an acronym, shoot it, because it doesn't serve anyone, because it's usually industry speak, and you're not talking people's language.
It's exclusionary in a lot of ways, right?
It
So
is.
you feel good if you're a member of the in-group that understands what that acronym is.
Yeah.
It gives you a feeling of security and safety and comfort. But at the same time, it's pushing people away who don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and the other skill I certainly have learned as well, both in reading, books by a book by Stephen King, who wrote not one of his only non-fiction books on writing is the actual title. If anyone has any interest in some of the basic toolkit you need to be a good writer, Stephen King wrote this amazing book on writing, and it's really, really cool. But one of the things I have learned over the years is to write for a grade 5 student. That's, if you can write for a grade 5 student, you're actually then going to be able to communicate, because almost everyone will be able to understand that. And I remember that my cousin, when I was about the age of 12 or 13, I thought I was so smart because I could use big words. And he said to me, because he lived on a farm and I lived in the city, so I suppose I was being a bit of a smart ass, city kid, city slicker. And I was using big words. He said, Jeff, you use too big of words. I don't understand them. I went, oh yeah, but that's so clever. And I went, but it only took me another, and I actually remember him saying that to me. So obviously it made an impact. Yeah. And the other thing too, I think, is, and we're talking about being able to talk in people's language, and that comes down to and listen and use words that will make the impact. I think the other thing is some people are introverts. So if you're too over the top, right, and intense, or fast, or the introvert will just switch off because you're annoying them.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So you almost got to mirror the energy as well as the words, as well as the language. It's really, um, and that comes from being aware. You're going, hang on, this person is switching off, or they're withdrawing.
Yeah, and I can tell you the other thing, Jeff. I can even wrap this around back to the book,
Yep.
which one of the levers, and these levers are, we call them smart strategic actions. So the purpose of a lever is that you get a greater impact for commensurately less effort, right?
Okay.
So if you're smart about what you do, you can get a bigger impact. And one of the levers deals with people who are in organizations that don't know enough to make good decisions.
Yep.
So this goes both ways. People at the bottom of an organization on the front lines look up and they say, well, leaders have their heads in the clouds. They don't understand what it's like down here, and they're making these decisions. And senior executives will look and say, well, why won't these people get it? It's so obvious what's going on in the marketplace and the changes that we need to make. So one of the levers that deals with this then I designed is called create a common database.
Yep.
And create a common database means that information is power is one of those popular sayings in companies. And I believe it's true. But the difference is I believe that power should be shared widely. So it's not something to be kept for yourself, but something to be shared widely. So create a common database is really about getting people smart collectively about what needs to happen, whatever that change may be. And the awareness that we're talking about self and other, is another part of the database, right? It's not just about competition and manufacturing processes. And yes, it's about that, but it also comes down to a very human level, because as people, we're impacted by change significantly. And when we're talking about organizations and change, we can lose the person in the process. And that, I think, is the reason why they say 70% of change efforts fail to achieve the objectives they set out to achieve.
Yeah, that's
been written up, Harvard Business Review and everywhere else. And it's like 7 out of 10, that's pretty bad news.
That's very interesting about information and sharing it, so everyone's got that visibility of information, and it's a democracy of information, really. And some organizations take that to a whole nother level. I think GitHub documents all its processes publicly. It's actually open source, 8,500 pages of their internal processes. So if you want to know how to get something done, or what the process is for hiring someone, HR, it's all written and it's all available publicly.
That's remarkable.
It is. And GitHub is one of the world's, I suppose, it runs its organization as a remote working community and company. I think they've got 1,500 staff, and they design it from the ground up to be that. And we're in the middle of that change, aren't we? Where remote work is here to stay. There's going to be those organisations that, and especially for the knowledge economy, it can be done quite readily.
Yeah.
But then you've got the hybrid of some in the office, some working remotely, and flipping between those. So you've got these 3 different levels. Now, let's touch on the book now. I think we'll need to move on to that. And so you mentioned in your book, you mentioned 4 elements of change, and you've already mentioned one of them, which is levers. And then you go in your book to the, I think, 8 levers that you need to use. But let's look at the 4 elements of change. We'll put a pin in levers and we'll come back to that. So tell us, so number 1 is levers. Just give us a quick description of what you mean by levers.
Sure. This goes back to a story about Archimedes. So a 3rd century BC Greek mathematician. I actually, on my wall, have a chalk drawing of Archimedes that I commissioned 25 years ago, before I wrote the book or even knew I would write the book, because leverage has always been a really important concept when I've been working with clients. So the lever, he says, give me a lever or a lever long enough, right? And a fulcrum on which to place it, and single-handed I shall move the world. So what he's talking about is getting a lot more bang for the buck, a lot more or impact for the effort by the lever. So the lever is what provides that opportunity for greater impact. And I have 8 of them in the book. We talk about the longer the lever, the greater the impact. So the smarter you are about how you use these, the greater the impact. They will pay benefits at the individual, team, or organizational level. But what I did is I designed them so that they would be, in a sense, long.
Right.
And by long, what I mean is that they would give you greater impact.
Right. Amplifying your effort, essentially.
Exactly.
Right. So the second element of change out of the 4 is resources.
Right. So in this case, Archimedes was pushing on this lever himself. And, as the story goes, the strongest man in the world would try and move this boulder in a competition, and pushing on it, he couldn't move it at all. And Archimedes would go in and install his lever. He would get a fulcrum, a small boulder that he would put it on top of, and then he would move this enormous rock when he was half the size of this individual, right? So when you look at the lever, you've got your resources. And in an organization, this is time, money, energy, talent, all kinds of things that you invest. And so what I believe is that by using these levers, you can take resources off the table and use them for something else, because less of them, you're trying to push that boulder uphill. As an individual, you've got a lever, you can get that moving much easier. And the resources that you save, it's like money at a poker table that you can just pull off the table and use for something else that you want, whether it's R&D or whether it's team development or whatever you want to do. You can hire more people with those funds that you save that you would have normally tried with what I call brute strength, organizationally move that rock.
Yeah, and there's a whole range of resources you can use to help you do that. And it's not just people, it's actually the tools you use, such as technology.
Processes and technologies,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, and we use a tool called Trello for collaboration, which has taken away a lot of the whole, email avalanche and really
Yep.
hard to manage. And Trello's just been we can do so much more with so much less, and it's brilliant. And it's actually owned by an Australian company called Atlassian, so which is doing quite well because they build tools for collaboration and remote workers. So, excuse me. So the third one is a pivot point. Tell us about what I mean by pivot point as the third element of change.
Right. So the pivot point, I say, in this model, where that pivot point gets put is where leverage comes from. So you can either get a lot of leverage if that pivot point is close to the object you're trying to move. If your listeners can imagine that you've got this log or this stick, and if that pivot point or small rock is close to that boulder, it's much easier to move. And
Yep.
by that, I say, get very clear on your results, and then you move that pivot point closer. If you're fuzzy on results, you don't know, that pivot point's going to move back. You're going to be farther away from that boulder. Things will be less clear to you. And it actually is way harder to get leverage to work for you because it's working against you, right?
Right.
It's like putting that stick on top of a rock in front of you and trying to move a boulder. So the results, I spent a whole chapter in the book on it, because if you get faster, easier, better results, but they're the wrong results, then it's not going to be helpful. You're moving the wrong boulder and you're achieving something that's the wrong result, faster, easier, and better than you could imagine possible.
Yeah, and that's your fourth element of change, isn't it? Is make sure you're moving the right object that maximizes the change.
Yeah, and spending time up front to get really clear about the results that you want and be able to define those in a way that, again, this common database, everybody in the organization understands what those results are. They can align their behavior. You don't have to worry about people getting on board, which in changes like everybody talks about. Well, you don't have to get somebody on board. If they understand what those results are, they're compelling, you can focus on them, they're clear, you can achieve them together.
Yeah, it's very important getting that clarity and making sure that you know what you're going to focus on. I suppose that's the pivot point, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that what you're saying, Jeff, is true. That being clear about those results and knowing them makes it possible to achieve them. Otherwise, you're out doing the best you can, but you're going to often come up short.
In other words, you're just being busy for busyness sake.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people going, "Hey, look at me, I'm so busy." And you're going, "Well, but are you actually achieving results? Are
To
you
what end?
achieving? Are you yes? And are you achieving the results that are needed?" Yeah. So let's touch quickly and skim across the surface of your book's 8 levers. Um, so the 8 levers of achieving faster results is essentially the core of the book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's, sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So that's all I was going to say, really.
So here's a lever. I think it's one of the most unique ones, and it's about accelerating the pace of change. Each of these levers deals with a problem that organizations or people bump up against when they're trying to create change. But one of the complaints that comes is it's too slow,
Hmm.
right? You talked about the pace of change.
Yeah.
If the organization's too slow to respond to the pace of change in its environment, you're in trouble.
Yep.
So the lever I designed is called Think and Act as if the future were now.
Yep.
And what that says is it's a paradigm shift. It's saying that rather than thinking of the future as something out there that's going to occur at a later point in time, we'll get to that future. It's saying get some image of that future, however small it might be, but some picture of what it looks like when you're in the future that you prefer, and bring it back into the present. Say, if I were thinking and acting as if I were already in that future, what choices, what decisions, what people would be involved? How would I choose to behave if that future were real for me right now? And I've had clients do this where they say, well, I'd like to be a more participative organization. And I say to them, so then where are the people in the organization in this meeting? Why aren't they showing up? So if your listeners are thinking, hey, what is it that I want this company to look like in a year? And then think and act as if that's the company that you're living in today. And you'll see that your behavior will start to change. Your
Mm.
decisions will start to change.
So, in other words, act as if you are already in the future.
Exactly.
And what does that look like? And break
And
that.
how does it feel and what differences does it make? And the other thing that's good about it that I found, Jeff, with clients is that as people start to behave differently, you look to the left and right of you and you start to see people doing business in better ways. And so people who are saying, yeah, this will never take, this will never stick, this isn't gonna, this too shall pass. If you look to the side of you and you see people doing business in new and better ways, you can't say that anymore.
No.
That crutch is taken away. And so it starts to increase what I call the believability index. It's like, how believable is this change that we're undertaking?
Hmm.
Well, if I see it occurring all around me, my believability index goes up and my effort goes up and my commitment goes up and my performance goes up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. Now that comes from awareness and watching, doesn't it? Which we talked about earlier. And one of the joys and pleasures I have with the podcast is just sitting down with some really smart people, and I'll get 2, 3 ideas from them. Might be even a tool. It might be a book. And I can apply it to my own life or my own business. And I've interviewed we're approaching, I think, 60, 70 or 70 people now. And entrepreneurs from all around the world, authors like yourself that have, you know, basically distilled decades of learning into 100 or 200 pages. And it's like I'm getting the wisdom of decades from this person distilled, and we're distilling it into an hour here. Frankly, that's one of the things we're doing, which is fantastic. And I feel so grateful to actually have people sharing that with me and the audience, because and it just increases my awareness. I'm going, wow, I didn't know crypto could do that. I didn't know you could write program in Ethereum, which you know the whole crypto world's a whole nother conversation, but which we covered last week. But now let's go back to maybe the first lever, which we didn't touch on, which I actually don't understand. And number one lever, And the number two we were talking about, act as if the future's already there. But number one was pay attention to continuity. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So when people work on change and they deal with it, that's what they pay attention to. And at face value, that makes sense. Well, I pay attention to something else. It's not that I ignore change, but I pay attention to something else, which is what not to change. And this is a very interesting theory because it's paradoxical. It's what you think, right? But you need to take the other side of the coin as well. So what happens when we pay attention to continuity, right? One thing is that the things that we're doing well, we're going to keep doing. We're not going to drop the ball on the things that we've done well. We're going to continue to exceed on those. Another thing it does is it gives people a sense of confidence. You know where you are. I say you have firm footing to take a leap into the unknown world of change if you can pay attention to continuity and actually have a firm foot on the ground and say, I know who we are. This is why people have missions, visions, and values in organizations, is because continuity matters. Now, they haven't framed it that way. They haven't talked about it that way. But why is it that we clutch so closely to those things in organizations and we spend so much time working on them? Is because they exhibit continuity for us during these turbulent times of change. So plenty of time and energy gets spent on change. And what I tell leaders is that when they communicate, whether it's in a memo, it's in a town hall, it's in a business meeting or review, working with their boards, that every time when they talk about what needs to change, they also pay attention to something that needs to stay the same and keep that on the front burner as well. Yeah. Because otherwise people feel overwhelmed, they feel confused, and change there's enough of it already. If we lose the piece of continuity, it's like one hand clapping, I believe.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. You can't have too much change. You've got to hold on to what is working and optimize that, and then make sure that you're not overwhelming people with too much change, because you're just going to lose them and they're just going to feel lost and possibly leave. Some great insights there. The third one was design it yourself. Could you briefly mention what you mean by that?
Sure. So in a lot of change work in organizations, people have a formula to follow. 6 steps, 8 phases, whatever it is that gets laid out. And I think that these can be helpful, but at the end of the day, each organization is unique. Each team is unique. Each individual is unique. And so you need to take that into consideration. And by design it yourself, what I'm saying is design the change effort, design the work, be very clear on your purpose. So Simon Sinek talks about what's your why. And I think that you've got to have that why answered for any change work that you're doing. And it's not just so we can make more profit or we can get a better share of the market. It's like, wait a minute, why are we doing it? Is it so that we can establish ourselves as a leader that will reign over the field of the business that we're in? That's something that might be exciting. If I'm going to be the leader in the field, so getting clear on your own purpose, your own outcomes, and then putting your own roadmap together. And I've done this with lots of different organizations, and no two are ever the same. Yeah. So rather than following a prescriptive formula, design it yourself says, you go out and figure out what's right for you, and then you carry that forward into the future.
And then you own it, and then you're positioning yourself as different, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's great. Number 4 was check or create a common database.
Right. And we've talked some about that one. I just have one short story I'll tell to put a little color to that, which is we were working with a merger and acquisition situation, and the senior executives had all the convertible bond rates and the floating interest rates and what would happen if they paid off these things sooner and how much money they could save. And what they did is they had meetings with employees and did mini MBA courses. Rather than saying, well, this is too complex, this is part of the database that people on the front lines won't understand. And these were people who worked on oil platforms and things like that didn't have an MBA. Well, they taught them about the specifics of business practicalities and financial instruments. And that was the information that needed to be shared. And it made a huge difference in the understanding that people had about why is it that we need to deliver on the objectives that we have, rather than, well, it's better for the street. No, it's better for us because we're going to pay these bonds off sooner.
Yeah. So in other words, you're giving people a common source of information that you can bring everyone with you.
Absolutely. You understand these much better than you think, Jeff.
Well, I suppose there's a few miles on these tyres here, so I suppose I've learned a little bit by watching and doing. Yeah, still a lot to learn over here in Sydney. Number 5, start with the important. Follow the energy. Start with impact. Follow the energy. My writing's so bad I can't even read it myself. But start with impact. Follow the energy. Okay. Explain.
So this is the antidote to people who are saying, should we be top down? Should we be bottom up? How should we start where the work is? And so what I say is look for the opportunity to make a difference. That's where you start. Even in a whole corporation, I had a client where we did a half-day problem solving session for 80 people, because that's where the opportunity was to start the work. It was a 10,000 person organization. They just laid off 1,000 people, but that's where the opportunity for impact was. So we started there. It turned into, as we followed the energy, where did people want to do the work next? So rather than following, again, this sort of cascade process, which is really popular, it became a 2-year change effort written up in Fortune and Business Week. It was a telecommunications company, but what they did is they started where there was an opportunity, and then they followed where people wanted to do the work next, and that became their guide, not some preconceived notion of the right way to do it.
Mm. So how'd you identify that energy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I actually got that on another podcast that I was on. So part of it is that you simply pay attention. You used the word awareness earlier in this conversation. And so if you're aware, the places where there's energy is where people are asking questions, where people are trying out new things, where people are eager to learn, where people aren't afraid to fail, right? So these kind of markers are places where you can see that there's energy. People ask you in to do work rather than you saying, we're coming to work with you. So the invitation comes from the organization and comes from different places in the organization. But I think that if you slow down enough in your own process of change and start to pay attention to the people around you, you can even ask them, right? This is shocking, but you can even ask people, do you want to do this work now? Just a simple question. And they actually will tell you the answer. If you can develop rapport, trust, and all those other good things that make for good communication, you can ask, where does it make sense? So we work with design teams, which are representative cross sections of the organization themselves. And we let them guide us about where the work needs to happen. So we'll meet with that team, different levels, different functions, and we'll say, where does it make sense to go next? And they are in the driver's seat and they can start, it's like a chess game basically. But when you're dealing with complex organizations, it's like 3-dimensional chess.
Yeah.
So the way to make it work is to have them move the pieces because they understand the board.
Yeah. And I'm just reflecting on what you're saying there, and that made me think of Google giving people 20% of their time to work on side hustles or projects. It's almost like doing a side hustle within the business. In other words, what interests you? And they're going to be making that from an observation about the industry they're in, and the vertical they're in within the company as well, and they're going to be identifying trends. And that's what Google does. I don't know if they still do it, but it certainly has been talked about a lot over the last decade or so. That 20%.
If Google sat back and said, so where is that 20% being used?
Yes.
On what kind of projects are people energized? They would be able to resource those maybe in some different and interesting ways to be able to give a turbocharge boost to those projects, and the ones that people want to work on are the ones that are best supported.
Yeah, it's yeah, and it's getting people to own it, which and this comes up with point number or lever number 6. You said develop a future people own.
Yeah. So this one is dealing with the problem of people getting stuck with saying, what's in it for me?
Yep.
Right. So it's like a selfish attitude, which frankly, I think it's a fair question. What's in it for me? I
Mm.
mean, if there isn't something in it for me, then at some level, that future isn't the right one.
Yep.
I'm either not right in the organization or that future's not the right one for the organization if I
Yep.
should be there. So what this says is if I have a compelling picture of the future and it's something that I want to own, I'm going to work to create that future. It's not something that I'm going to fight against. I'm not going to resist. So when I say develop a future people want to call their own, what we're looking for is something that I want to be part of, that I'll be proud of creating, that
Mm.
I envision as a better future for myself. And that's the kind of futures that we need to create for the organization and for the people in it.
And that will drive the energy up again, which, in other words, this is your levers you're talking about are almost like I call it the matrix. In other words, it's they all feed off each other,
Yeah.
and that's where you really build momentum and energy. And that leads us to the next one, next lever, number 7. Find opportunities for people to make a meaningful difference. Can you explain what
Right.
you mean by that in your book?
So a meaningful difference, people can do an excellent job in their day job. And that's necessary. I mean, any organization to perform well needs people to do their job well. But change is something special and it's a unique opportunity. So if I can find ways to call forth greatness from others, if I can say, look, I need your help to make this happen. And without your help, without your skills, knowledge, experience, commitment, this isn't going to go forward. It's like sharing the burden,
Mm.
right? I was talking with somebody about the burden of command last week. And I said, part of the reason that people feel like it's a burden is because they're trying to carry it themselves. You got a whole organization of people who can be excited if you can create opportunities for them to make a meaningful contribution, to make a difference.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, Jeff, I think there are very few people who don't want to make a difference. I think there are very few people who are like, let me just punch my ticket, get through life, get a nice casket and call it a day,
Mm.
right? I think most of us want to make a difference and make a contribution. So when you're dealing with change, great opportunities for people to make profound contributions. Let's find the opportunities and let's give it to them. And then let's trust them to step up and make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. If they own it and trust them to actually carry it out, people will constantly surprise you, and that's and they've got to own it, and they've got to have their own purpose within the purpose of the organisation, and then you get real energy. Lever number 8, last one, and then we're going to leap into, I think, the last little area which you want to touch on, which is we're in a world of very fast change driven by a black swan event. So number 8 was make change work part of daily work.
Yeah. So this deals with the problem of people saying, I have too much on my plate,
Right.
right? Now, who's been in an organization where people don't have too much on their plate? So what this says is if you make change work part of daily work, it's like, this is not going to be an extra thing we have to do on Friday afternoon in a committee that I signed up for. We're going to change. So it becomes another task. I worked with a leadership team and they had performance issues. They weren't working well together. So rather than even setting up an offsite, which is like 2 days away from work, the emails stack up, all kinds of problems associated with that. And I'm a consultant, right? So I've spent my share of time in offsite retreats. But what we did is we said, look, every meeting, a half an hour of the meeting is going to get devoted to performance improvement. So the very first meeting, they dealt with feedback. And they took half an hour and just part of their regular staff meeting, and they shared feedback with each other. So rather than it being a special event, they just made it part of every meeting that they had with each other was about getting better and better. Now, the Japanese have a word for this. They call it Kaizen.
Mm.
And Kaizen is about making small improvements every day in everything that you do. So if you see change work as part of daily work, then it just becomes one and the same.
Mm.
And if I have to show up to do work in the morning, then I show up to do change in the morning, and it becomes one and the same. And that's where I think there's a lot of power, is reframing people's thinking about this so that it's not another to-do item on the list. It's actually part of my daily work.
Mm. And reflecting on that, if you just do one thing every day that moves the company forward or yourself forward, guess what? In 365 days, you're going to be good. You're going to actually look back and say, "My God, we did all this." Yeah. So let's just wrap it up. In fact, I'm going to need to pause here because I need to put the battery into my Mac. So.
Okay. How's this going for you, Jeff?
It normally lasts a lot longer than that. The reality is that, and I've discovered it too. Just for example, I'm a content creator, and I realised that just creating a piece of content every day as a blogger, at the end of 1 year, I'd created, what was it, 4 or 5 articles a week, 200 articles. I think we've now got like 3 or 4 million words. We've got 2,000 or 3,000 articles, maybe 4,000. We've built Google authority over the decade. So, because just one day at a time, you don't think you're making a difference, but making that one step towards the future, just one thing. And if you're a content creator, well, you're going to make sure you're creating content every day. Don't try and do 10 pieces of content, maybe just do one.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably written up in your book on writing.
Yeah. So, yeah, but it's really fascinating. Now, I want to, I suppose, just the last thing I wanted to cover with you was we're in the middle of huge changes for organisations, and I'd be interested in what you think's, with COVID and what's happened in the world with remote work. What are 2 or 3 things that you think organisations be aware of to move confidently into the future with this change? Because I certainly think that we've accelerated change that was already happening. Remote work was already happening, but it was moving slowly. Because you're trying to change culture of essentially centuries of industrialisation, turning up 9 to 5. But now we've had this accelerated change, which I believe has pushed us, maybe 10 years into the future. What are your thoughts on how organisations can manage this? Your just 2 or 3 insights you believe are really important for organisations to consider.
Sure. The first one is, and I think this is another paradoxical thing that's going on, is that with COVID, it almost was like hitting the pause button in a major way, because a lot of things slowed down or came to a dead halt.
Yep.
And during that pause, you had that acceleration occurring at the same time.
Yep.
So because people could slow down enough to look around and say, how are we going to deal with this situation? They started to come up with answers and responses that they never would have ever gotten to, or in your case, as you're saying, in 10 years, maybe we would have stumbled upon it, right? But these changes about what makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, what makes sense for how work needs to get done? And I think that the way people are working right now makes a lot more sense than it used to. I mean, getting all these people coming into the same place, paying for that huge footprint of property, um, the amount of time spent driving to work and back, the greenhouse gases from the driving here and back, all of that got put on hold and said, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this. And decentralizing, you were talking about crypto and said you had that on your show last week. And we talk about the decentralization and democratization of information. Here I'm talking about create a common database and saying, information is power and it should be shared widely. All of these go into new science theory, right? And looking at self-organizing systems and saying, what makes sense is there's a mentor of mine, Meg Wheatley. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote a book called Leadership in the New Science. And she has a way of explaining this by saying, what wants to happen? Now, if you step back and you say, what wants to happen, then you're talking about an intelligent universe, right? There's knowledge out there at the energetic level that says some things are preferred, some things are easier to do. Now, my book about faster, easier, better results is based on that same theory. It's like, if you get leverage put in place in the right way, you just get faster, easier, better results. You don't have to work extra hard for them. It's not going to take more effort. It actually takes less effort, but a different kind of effort. So one thing I think that organizations can do is pay attention to what actually makes sense, not the way we've done things for years and years, but what's going to work best for us in this particular situation. So when I talk about design it yourself as one of the levers, it applies here too. Let organizations and the people in them design their work themselves and figure out what works best. And then again, it comes down to, and your fellow that you had last week was talking about OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. So have people focus on the results that they want to achieve and let them figure out the process by which they achieve those results.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that we could really do is get a results orientation and then let creativity and innovation take hold to figure out how are we going to get that done. I also think that another point is around collaboration and finding new and different and better ways to work together, I think is part of the human condition. I think that you're talking about Atlassian, and I hear them advertised every day as I drive my dog to the field on NPR here in the States. 4:00, where am I? I'm driving my dog to the field. So you can set your clock by that like a metronome. Why? Because he comes up to me and he starts whining at about 3:59, telling me that it's close to 4. But that's another story. But the reason that Atlassian is where they are in the world is because collaboration is being seen through a fresh set of lenses.
It is.
Right? And so we knew that working together, I wrote a book called You Don't Have to Do It Alone, How to Involve Others to Get Things Done. So I've been a big proponent and fan of collaboration my entire career. And what we're doing is we're finding new and better ways to do that. And companies like Atlassian are helping us find that way. And you talked as well, you could talk about Slack, or you could talk about any of these other technologies, right? With Trello, all of these are about finding new and better ways for people to bring their best selves to the workplace. And at the end of the day, I think if each of us can find ways, and if together we can find ways to bring our best selves to the workplace, it'll be amazing what we can accomplish. And so this issue with COVID and what do people need to do coming out of it, give yourselves permission to find those new and better ways. Don't hold yourself back by old paradigms, but look into, well, what ifs? Asking that question, maybe we could, what if, how might we? And asking those questions will get you much more creative answers than, let's go back to the way we had things. I was comfortable the old way. I knew what to do. It's like, it's okay to not know the answer. One of the things that I know is true is that a good question will beat a good answer any day.
Yeah, it's. I think removing trying to unlearn old paradigms that don't serve us anymore, and that has happened in the last 18 months. That's been a big light's been shone on that. And I've been reflecting on that, and the phrase I've been using recently is, in a fast changing world, unlearning is as important as learning. I'd be really fascinated by your thoughts on what's the challenge of helping organisations unlearn in helping them make change.
Great question. Um, First of all, I think it takes a lot of courage to unlearn.
Mm.
Now, you can be an individual, you can be a team or an organization, but to let go of certainty takes a lot of courage.
Mm.
And unlearning is saying, I'm going to take something I know that in some way is part of my identity. It defines who I am. Our knowledge base is part of who we are. And you're going to say to me, hey, take that piece and let go of it. Without knowing what's going to replace it, because we're like a vacuum, right? Take something out, something's got to go in. And so this notion of unlearning, I think, takes a lot of individual courage to look in the mirror and to say, I'm going to be okay on the other side because I'm okay as I am. And as an organization, to look at this and to say, look, we need to unlearn some things because they may not be serving us as well as they had in the past, or as well as they need to serve us in the future. So I think that courage is at the core of the question that you're asking. And it can be at the individual level or the organizational level. And for leaders, my advice to them is to say, again, make it okay for people to make mistakes. Part of learning is getting it wrong. And I even have a belief that sometimes the faster you can make mistakes, the better you're going to get. Because it makes it, first of all, your cycle time gets reduced from experimenting, from trying to learning to doing. That cycle time gets less. And it also culturally becomes okay to start experimenting. Like it's affirmed to go out and do business in new ways. And the only way to do business in better ways is to start doing business in new ways.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. And we are afraid of the unknown as humans. It's wired in. But what I've discovered is that beyond the horizon, which we can't see beyond or over, is a world of positive possibility that's infinite. And we as humans are wired to be creators. And I am constantly surprised by what shows up over the horizon once we step bravely into that future. And I think that's where it gets really, really exciting. Because if you're choosing the known all the time, that's all you're going to get.
Well, and you and I were talking before we got on this podcast about a shared hero of ours, Martin Seligman.
Yes.
And what Seligman did is he moved from this learned helplessness to learned optimism to flourishing. And I think Jeff and I would both recommend those books to all of the listeners because there's such insight in them and such wisdom. But if I look to the future with that optimism and positive psychology that Martin Seligman founded, if I look with that optimism, I'm excited to be part of it. If I go from a helpless standpoint and it's like, well, never gone my way, never going to go my way, poor me, like whatever your version of that is. But if you can look with an optimistic view to the future, it's something that you're going to want to be part of, and it's something that you're going to want to create. And I think that at the end of the day, I agree with you that while the human nature is to have some fear of that future, the more we can work on ourselves around our own awareness and saying, am I looking at this positively and optimistically, or am I looking at it pessimistically, and catch ourselves and be able to say, what would an optimistic view of this be? Whatever the situation is, if we ask that question and start training ourselves, I think the awareness starts to shift and our experience start to shift, and then our results start to shift.
Yeah, and then that makes the future exciting.
It definitely does.
And I remember, I don't know whether it's a line in a song, but the future is so bright I've got to wear shades.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Except we just can't see that future sometimes. We've got to remind ourselves that it will be okay. In fact, everything is okay. Um, we just got to accept that. And thank you
But
very
one
much.
thing I'll say, Jeff, I just
Yep,
want to toss this in as another gem for your listeners,
yep.
which is I often tell myself people are doing the best they can, or they would be doing better.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that, Jim. Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for sharing your wisdom of decades, which have been distilled into one book. And the book is called Leverage Change 8 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results. It's out now on Amazon. If people want to contact you so they can keep stepping into the future and keep evolving and changing, how can they easily contact you, Jake?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is my website is jakejacobsconsulting.com. And my request for you, if you're listening, is go on there and grab an ebook. It's called 27 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results Immediately. And it's proof that, in fact, these levers make sense. There's 27 ideas. You can apply them tomorrow morning in whatever you're doing, and they will get you faster, easier, better results. So it's like, don't take my word for it. Pull down the ebook, put those things to work. Each lever's got several ideas to it, and see for yourself how much faster, easier, and better change can be for you.
Thank you. I do like a good ebook, so I'm going to go and download it straight after we finish here. So thank you very much, Jake. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Jeff.